Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Bobby Sylvester, and we are missing tags for today's show. If you didn't see on his Twitter, he has mono. It basically took the National Guard to get him to take even an hour off. And he and I talk about it often. Like, we just love our job so much. And I'm sure most people listening know this is your dream job, and we don't take it for granted that we get to do what we get to do. Plus, working for Fantasy Pros is as good as it gets because the people are amazing. The platform's way larger than we deserve. And I just know Tags wants to be here for you guys and keep working his tail off to get you every last detail of information. So if you have a chance, just pop on over to his Twitter, wish him well at Mike Tagliere NFL. By the way, I'm at Bobby Fantasy Pro. I'm sure it would make his week to hear from you all. We just love our listeners so much. So thank you guys for supporting us. And please make sure to shoot Mike a message. He'd really appreciate it. So we've got our DFS show today, and I'll be joined by Christian Abbonizio from Daily Fantasy Insider. But first, I want to remind you about the giveaway we have going on. One lucky listener is going to get a $100 gift card to fathead.com. They've got those awesome wall decals that are the size of AJ Green or Luke Kuechly, or helmets, logos, whatever you want. With Christmas coming up, it's a good time to check out fathead.com and see what they have for you or for someone you love. And we've got a promo code for you if you do. If you enter Fantasy Pros at checkout, you get 10% off. Again, that's Fantasy Pros, all one word, for 10% off at fathead.com. And if you want a shot at the $100 gift card, just take 30 seconds and subscribe and drop us a review on iTunes. Then screenshot it and email it to us at contest@fantasypros.com. Okay, I'm now joined by Christian Abbonizio of dailyfantasyinsider.com. Christian, the last time you were on, you talked us into a bet that involved booty shorts, and I've got to say, it didn't go too well for me, man.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Bobby. Thanks for having me on again. Yeah. But, maybe you didn't want, maybe that wasn't the best decision to bring me back.
Yeah, well, we're not going to do anything like that this time. Tags is gone, and he can't defend himself, but I'm still going to say it. He got lucky in that contest. He had the first pick or something. I had the worst. It was like a 10-team league, and I think I had the 12th pick. So
that's brutal.
He got really lucky. Otherwise, wouldn't have happened. But we're going to be covering FanDuel and DraftKings in today's episode. We'll go position by position, and I'd like to cover a little strategy before jumping right to the players. I think it helps to know exactly what you're shooting for when you're building your strategy. So, Christian, what is a winning score on FanDuel in cash game and GPP lineups?
As well as anyone that it can vary week to week, depending on how high or low scoring the week is. I'm looking to get around 150 to feel good about where I am. Sometimes that doesn't quite do it. Sometimes, 130 is cashing. So, I would say if you're looking for just a general benchmark to, a score that's going to get you some dough, probably 150 is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, for GPP, that's definitely right around 150 is right. For cash games, I've seen it as low as 95. I've seen it as high as 130. Since we have so many guys on buys this week, it's probably going to be closer to that 105, 110 range.
I would say with it thinned out a bit, I would have to agree. That's probably, this is just to be conservative. This is what you're shooting for.
Yeah.
If you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And for GPP, 150, man, that's a nice score. If we want to get to the very tip top, because you know how the tournaments work,
mm-hmm.
Only 20% of people cash in tournaments, and those who do cash don't tend to make much money. But once you get to the tip top, we're talking about turning $7 into $500,000. So what kind of score do you need for that? Do we need to pass 200?
Oh, for sure. Again, it depends on the week. I would say, most of those big high scoring, especially those gigantic tournaments, you're going to see scores up in the 200, up to 220 even sometimes. Sometimes even higher. You never know. Because sometimes you get a situation where, especially if a couple low priced guys go off for 3 touchdowns, you get a Tyler Croft or something who can drop 3 tutties, and all of a sudden, a 4K guy goes for 35 points, and now you've really raised the bar. So, yeah, super dependent week to week. But if you're trying, you got to get a lot of luck involved with getting those really, really high 200 plus scores.
So we've got $60,000 to spend on FanDuel. And, so if we're shooting for 150, that means we need to get 2.5x. And what I mean when I'm saying x is 2.5 times their salary. So if a guy's $8,000, you need him to score 20 points. For a quarterback, that's not that much. It's 2 touchdowns, 300 yards without an interception. And it might not seem like much, but like if you're trying to hit value on all 9 players, it's really tough. So that's why we're not going to make risky picks for our cash games, and we'll get into that later. For GPP, like what kind of guys are you shooting for?
Well, I'm looking for guys that, very low owned, if you're really trying to hit the big money in those GPPs. And you're looking for a guy with a floor, around that 2 times multiplier, but someone who could go for 6 times value based on his price. So, a guy this week that I really like in that kind of situation is Josh Jackson. So, he's coming in at 3.6, maybe I want to say on DraftKings is 3.9 on DraftKings. So this is a guy that needs 50, 60 yards maybe to hit value, and then, to crush value if he grabs one of his, signature long balls or, any kind of touchdown. I mean, he's busting out he's making up for quite a bit of value on the rest of your lineup.
And we've seen worse players than Josh Doxson go for 2 touchdowns and 80 yards, like Benny Fowler did it in week 1. And if you have that guy in your lineup and he's $3,000 and he's owned in less than 0.5% of lineups, then you're sitting pretty. Like you basically can't win a tournament unless you have that guy. So you've got to take some chances. Now I think Doxson's a great play for cash games and for GPP, but a lot of times like you'll look at these winning GPP lineups, and if you saw these lineups before the contest, you'd probably gag. And that's what your tournament lineup might look like. Like it might make you sick to your stomach looking at it, just like there's no way this can win, but you've got to take some contrarian plays, because if you don't, like you can't win the big bucks, and it could be life-changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all relative. Like when you look at those lineups that have won the million, the millionaire and all those big contests, it's these lineups with, 3% owned guys across the board. So, and that's not something that is easy to do with a normal bankroll, so you have to, there's an element, there's a humongous element of luck in winning those giant tournaments. There's no doubt about it. But, you can look and see a trend in the strategies that play out in those winning lineups. And you get a lot of those really, really low owned guys who happen to pop off, and that's just kind of seems to be like the recipe there.
Yeah. And, a lot of people, if they're just playing one tournament or 2 tournament lineups, like they don't want to waste their money. So they're like, well, I'm just going to play it safe. Le'Veon Bell, LaShawn McCoy, Tom Brady, and then I'll plug it in with target guys. Like that doesn't tend to cut it. I mean, it would have worked last week with Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, sometimes the guys who are 40% owned are in the winning lineups, but a lot of times you see guys like you mentioned, Tyler Kroft, Benny Fowler, even Jared Goff in week 1, I remember. So it's really interesting. And one more thing I wanted to say before we move on for cash games, I heard someone say something profound, and it wasn't like, it's really simple. I've stuck to it ever since. For cash games, just play the smartest lineup. Don't get cute. Don't worry about ownership percentages. Just build the best lineup. And if you can't say that's the smartest lineup I can build before you submit it, then rethink things and do it again before you flush money down the toilet. Because in cash games, like it really just comes down to who builds the smartest lineup, and it tends to work out much more often than not.
Oh, for sure. I mean, when people try and get cute with ownership in cash games, that's when they start losing. That's when they start hemorrhaging. It's just, you try and worry about, well, who's going to be 40% owned and who's going to be 25% owned. And that discrepancy in cash games is not big enough to worry about. Like, you just need to make sure that each one of your plays is optimal, and you're trying to hit those multipliers, and you're trying to max out your salary.
Yeah, and you want to go for consistent guys too. Like Dak Prescott every single week gets 17 plus. Whereas, you've got guys who are averaging 18 points per game, but a lot of times like they'll go for 6 points, like Ben Roethlisberger. Obviously he hasn't done it this season, but you can't use guys like that in your cash game lineups. And it does take, a lot of research. That's why we're here, is to talk to you guys about that. But, the more that you look into it and prepare yourself for cash games, the better off you are. Okay, Christian, so let's get on to the slate. On FanDuel, we've got 10 games to work with since the Thursday night game's out, the Sunday morning game in London, and the Monday night game are all missing, plus all the buys. And on DraftKings, we don't even get the Sunday night game, so it's just 18 teams to choose from. And I'll tell you what, Christian, I'm not too excited about my lineup because of all the limited options.
Well, I think the one thing that is interesting about this week, with all these buys, there's not any overwhelming chalk. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because it allows you to make those smart plays and not worry so much about I mean, it's just an extension of what I was saying about you don't need to differentiate yourself with ownership. So you don't need to worry about picking a guy that's going to be 70% owned across the main slate because there aren't any, or at least there shouldn't be any this week. So it depends on how you look at it. I think it can be good in certain circumstances. I personally kind of like it this way, but the buys do make it really weird.
For cash games, I kind of like to look at ownership percentages, not to like play the contrarian, but because ownership percentages tend to tell you, well, it does tell you exactly what people are willing to spend their money on. And if they're willing to spend, if 50% of people are willing to spend their money on Le'Veon Bell, well, it probably makes sense to spend up on Le'Veon Bell. So I kind of like that. Like if you look at our lineup optimizer, typically it's going to be in line with what the high ownership guys are, because those are the players that tend to make the most sense for cash games.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a direct correlation between ownership and like smart plays. Like that's why ownership exists. So if you want to get, especially if you're opening up the slate for the first time, you're trying to get a good feel for it, you might as well start by looking at the ownership. And it's great when you can dig a little deeper and then deviate from that a little bit. But you don't have to get too cute, especially for cash.
Our ownership this week, Christian, tells us that Carson Wentz is going to be the highest owned player on the main slate, at least for FanDuel. Is that the guy that you most want in your cash game lineups?
As a huge Eagles fan, I would love to say yes. I mean, Carson Wentz is the truth. But
he's awesome, man.
He is absolutely amazing. I love watching him. I love having him on the Eagles. I got to say no, though.
Me too.
And I think that because, I mean, it's a decent cash stack, is that Eagle stack. I think we've begun to maybe parse out a little bit of, which receivers in that offense are going to get the ball more often. It has been a very spread offense, but we've started to see some trends over the past couple weeks. So those things are all good. The bad thing is the matchup is almost too good. I mean, you look at San Fran and what has happened to San Fran in the past couple of weeks. You can't imagine Carson throwing for another 4 or 5 touchdowns this week. It doesn't.
Well, they're going to be up 2 touchdowns. Like, how much are you going to throw in the second half?
Exactly. I mean, this is the kind of game that you can very easily see the Eagles try and run the ball in. So now Wendell Smallwood's coming back. He's getting healthier and healthier each week. You still have LeGarrette Blount. This is the kind of game that they could just pound the rock after a big performance from Carson in the passing offense. And, the San Fran passing defense, their secondary, they're going to have to respect Carson and his squad. So it's a great opportunity for them to run the ball. And with against a weak run defense like San Fran, it makes a lot of sense. As
bad as they are against the pass, they might actually be worse against the run. And I do love the Eagles' running game this week, but not enough to use either player in cash because who's going to get the carries? Blunt's looked really good, but now that Smallwood's back, he's getting more work, and he's going to get all the work in the passing game. So I think it's going to be more of a split. Maybe one of them, probably Smallwood, if anyone, goes for a long touchdown or 2, and he could be real nice for GPP. But I do like Carson Wentz. He's probably my 3rd favorite quarterback for cash games this week. My number 1 guy, however, is Phillip Rivers. It's not necessarily that, Phillip Rivers is a world beater or anything. You look at what he's done this year, and it's not the most impressive, but he's the 17th most expensive quarterback, and he's projected for the 9th most points. It's because he plays the easiest pass defense in the league. New England's given up 24 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and Phillip Rivers is going for 17 per game. That includes 2 games against Denver, 1 game against Miami, who's had a really good pass defense, and he throws a ton of passes. So I think that continues. 30, 40, maybe 45 passes in this game for Rivers as they're trying to come back. And if they can keep it close, he could go nuts. But I think he's a really safe play at 7,500.
I agree. I like Rivers a lot. I do like him more than Wentz. I think I would have to agree with you. I think Wentz is down there on my 3 or 4 for cash games. He's a great option, just not my favorite. I guess my only thing that I'm concerned about with Rivers is the Pats defense. So I mean, it was atrocious weeks 1 through 5 or 1 through 6. And then last week, it wasn't quite so bad. And so, you have to wonder. The thing that I'm always very cautious about in cash games is when I'm targeting a specific matchup is the coaching staff changing something that is – so it's not just a freak outlier of a week. Have the Pats gotten their stuff together on defense? And that remains to be seen. It looks like they did from last week. It's a 1-game sample size, so I'm not going all in on that, but it's possible. So then that makes me a little bit standoffish from that because there's no way to really see how stuff with the coaching staffs is going to pan out until it actually does. So that's, especially for cash games, when I'm looking to find the safest option, that's the one thing that I'm kind of concerned about, because there's absolutely no way to predict that unless you see some kind of reports coming out of the organization itself.
Yeah, that's a good point. And by the way, Dante Hightower is now out for the season with pectoral muscle for the Patriots. I would argue he's probably their best defensive player too.
It's a huge blow for them. I mean, it really strengthens the argument for that matchup for sure.
Yeah,
it
doesn't exactly help
player.
The passing game. It's more against the running game and everything, but he does get after the quarterback some. So throwing it out there.
Definitely a threat with the pass rush for sure. And overall, when you lose a guy like Hightower, it can affect the whole way that the defense runs. So, it depends. A lot of those guys are involved with calling, changing the defensive schemes on the field and stuff like that. So again, those are the kind of things that the fantasy nerds like us, we can't predict that. We just don't know how that's going to shake out.
So who are your main one or two guys in cash games that you're looking at?
My favorite cash game stack, which starts with my favorite cash game quarterback, is the Bengals.
Okay.
And I think Andy Dalton is the definition of safe this week.
Yeah.
You can pair him with a lot of good options. AJ Green, Tyler Kroft, those guys are really, really good options. And the matchup, the Colts get a lot of crap, but their run defense is actually kind of above average, low key.
You're right.
And so, I'm actually okay with this kind of. I mean, I don't want to call it a funnel defense because that would suggest that they have a good defense in some way, which I'm not. I don't know, but I definitely like this matchup against one of the worst pass defenses in the league. Paired with a fine run defense. This isn't the kind of game that you would expect. I think there's a lot of hype around Joe Mixon this week, which is okay. I'm okay with that because he's so cheap. But overall, I like the passing game options more. I think you can get a lot of usage out of Andy Dalton paired with AJ Green and Tyler Kroft. You can get a lot of their market share there with only a couple players, which is just ideal for cash.
I think it's a great call. Andy Dalton's my number 2 in DraftKings. He's my number 4 on FanDuel. I think he's a really safe play. I mean, just look at what Blake Bortles did to Indianapolis last week, and that tells you everything that you need to know.
Exactly.
And Andy Dalton is a very good play for cash games. What do you think about Kirk Cousins against Dallas? He's on my radar too.
Yeah, Kirk. I mean, you're talking about a game that I think the last time I checked it was the highest projected over/under on the slate. It's shaping up to be a shootout, and Cousins always finds ways to make he always produces fantasy points even when it doesn't even seem like he has good options. It almost feels like the Redskins haven't really been figured out on with their wide receiver core and stuff throughout the whole year, but somehow he's still putting up numbers, and you could see it last week. There was Jordan Reed caught a couple touchdowns and stuff, but you're still spreading the ball out to Vernon Davis, Jameson Crowder, now Doxson. So there's a lot of really weird options. I mean, Terrell Pryor is non-existent, but I would say the rest of the offense is in a weird limbo. But Kirk's constant in my eyes, so I like him too. I think if there was a good quarterback to play as a one-off, it would be Kirk.
Yeah, and I also like Dak Prescott virtually every week in cash games, but Josh Norman says he's probably going to play. He really wants to go up against Dez Bryant, and that doesn't exactly bode well for Dak Prescott. So he was on my radar, but when I saw the Josh Norman news, I would just say no, forget Dak Prescott. Tom Brady against the Chargers. I mean, Brady's great, but the Chargers have a good pass defense. The spread is really high, so maybe he doesn't throw more than 30 passes in a game. So I think we named the players to really consider there. Andy Dalton, Phillip Rivers, Kirk Cousins. Are there any super cheap plays that you would play this week?
I mean, my super cheap play is just Andy Dalton.
Yeah. He is really cheap. I mean, he's virtually as cheap. He's cheaper than Case Keenum. He's as cheap as Josh McCown, Jacoby Brissett. That's a great value.
Especially for cash games. I mean, you can start talking about some cheap guys for GPPs and stuff, but Andy Dalton's a great value for how safe he is for cash. Considering his price tag, oh my gosh, I love him.
And what are you going to do? Like in cash games, go down and get Mitch Trubisky, who might throw less than 10 passes again, or Deshaun Kaiser, who has been yanked twice in the middle of games.
Exactly. Yeah. And against one of the best defenses. I mean, come on, like, give me a break. Yeah. So there's just, you're exposing yourself to way too much risk if you dig any deeper than Andy Dalton or Phillip Rivers.
Yeah. Okay, now for GPP at quarterback, is there someone who stands out to you? Well, for me, it's Russell Wilson. I basically say Russell Wilson here every single week because Russell Wilson has put up huge games against really good defenses and mediocre defenses and bad defenses. It's just what Russell Wilson does every once in a while, 2 or 3 times a season. He's the top quarterback on the slate, and you don't see it coming. And he's like 4% owned, and somebody gets a big time winner. So I love Russell Wilson this week, 6,500, even against Houston.
I got to agree. I like Russ too. Russ is an interesting play. Basically just because the Seattle offense is so weird. But this week against Houston, somehow, I guess it makes sense when you watch how he plays. But Russell's really good against blitzes. And so are his best options. Like Doug Baldwin is a great receiver when his team is blitzed, which is almost counterintuitive, but somehow he's putting up monster numbers when they blitz. And now you have Houston is one of the highest percent blitzing teams. It's a good spot for Russell. Yeah. I like it.
And I think this is actually a situation, Christian, where you can use Russell naked. What that means is that you don't pair him with any of the wide receivers on his team. And this is something you only do for running quarterbacks. Because if Russell Wilson goes nuts, it's because he gets in the end zone twice with his legs and runs for 80 yards, which sometimes happens with Russell Wilson. Maybe you could use him with Jimmy Graham. Maybe you could use him with Doug Baldwin or both, or Tyler Lockett or Paul Richardson. One of those guys is probably going to go nuts, but sometimes all you need is the quarterback, and then you can find, 3 wide receivers from other teams who are going to get, 130 yards and a touchdown or 2 touchdowns.
I agree. I think the idea of playing a quarterback naked is much more conducive to GPPs than cash games.
Yes.
So, like I said, I actually, I think maybe I'm a little bit more liberal with my naked quarterback play in some situations. Like I like Kirk as a naked option, except for that Doxson's you can't ignore Doxson. He's so cheap, but theoretically he's the type of quarterback that you could play naked.
Yeah, because he passes it to like 8 guys every game.
Exactly.
But let this be known though. I'm going to have 100% exposure to Josh Doxson this weekend. Like, there is not going to be a single lineup, cash game, or GPP where I don't use him.
It just doesn't make sense to not have him in your lineups, considering that he's, technically a wide receiver 1 in an offense that passes more than almost any offense in the league. And, it's to be 3-9 in that kind of situation is unbelievable.
And he's extremely talented. It's not like he's Kenny Britt in this offense that throws a lot. It's a guy who was a high draft pick.
Yeah, he was a first-round draft pick.
I guess Kenny Britt was too, but Kenny Britt.
Yeah. Cleveland, you had all these complications, and it's just cancerous. But so I think Russell, you could play him naked for sure. I think I love the spot that Doug Baldwin's in, but I could understand how you couldn't you could be in a situation where it doesn't make sense, salary-wise. So I could see that. But yes, I agree. He's the type of quarterback that you could just play naked for sure.
2 other guys on my GPP radar that I like a lot. Matt Ryan at the Jets. The Jets just aren't very good against passing. And Matt Ryan's been horrible, so his ownership's going to be low. But his touchdown rate right now is unbelievably low. He's due for some positive regression. And I've had a bunch of people ask me, positive regression, that doesn't make sense. It's not regressing back to 0. It's regressing to the mean. The mean for touchdown percentage for Matt Ryan is 4.8, 4.9%. Right now, he's well under 4%. So he's going to regress towards that mean of 4.9, which is a positive regression. So that's what that means if you guys were wondering. So I like Matt Ryan, and I also love Cam Newton against the Buccaneers. They just haven't been using Jonathan Stewart on the goal line that much anymore, and that means Cam Newton has big time upside, Christian.
You stole it right out of my mouth there. I was going to say my favorite GPP stack for the week is actually the Carolina Panthers and Cam Newton. I think there's just humongous upside there. I think, like you said, their dominant running back is a pass catching back. So all of the touchdown opportunity is going to go through Cam for the most part. And I think that the opportunities that his wide receivers will have this week, you just can't look past it for GPPs. You can get a guy like Kelvin Benjamin, who's now going up against Robert McClain. The Bucs actually switched Vernon Hargreaves and Robert McClain in their positions on the defense. So, normally Hargreaves would be covering Benjamin, but instead McClain moves out to the outside, which is great for Benjamin because he can absolutely dominate him. He's the exact type of cornerback that Kelvin Benjamin can feast on.
Yeah.
Benjamin's much taller than him. He's faster than him, and he's just a better player. So this is a great opportunity for a guy who's been relatively a lot quieter than people would have guessed. Even going back a year or two, I would say. And then you also have options like Devin Funchess, which is really,
touchdown upside,
a solid option. Yeah. I mean, I would say, my concerns with this Panthers stack is exactly what I was saying about, kind of what happens with the Redskins is they spread the ball out a lot. So it's hard to, it's the opposite of what happens with the Bengals, where you get a lot of usage in just a couple of players. You're going to get it a lot more spread out with the Panthers, but a full Panthers stack could be really, really valuable this week against a pretty weak Tampa Bay defense.
Yeah.
You could even go as far as to dig towards like Nick O'Leary, not Nick O'Leary.
Oh, Ed Dixon.
Ed Dixon. I'm sorry. Yep, Ed Dixon. Ed O'Leary on my mind. I meant Ed Dixon. Not even really similar players
guy.
at all.
Yeah,
but...
I mean, they're both horrible, but they're both getting much opportunity.
Both
it makes
horrible.
sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, Ed Dixon. So there's a lot of guys in that Carolina Panthers stack that you could utilize, and there's a lot of good opportunity there this week. I love them in GPP.
I would typically not advise you to use a quarterback and a running back in the same stack, but if you're ever going to do it, like, this is the time. A lot of people forget that Christian McCaffrey is a breakout player. Like, he's the kind of guy who can break away an 80-yard run or an 80-yard catch and run. And he hasn't done it yet this year, but that's who he is. And he could get 10 receptions too. I know he hasn't gone crazy yet, but he's got a lot of talent and single game upside. Here's the thing with GPP. Like, even if there's a 90% chance that the offense isn't going to go nuts, which is probably a pretty realistic number, there's still a 10% chance that they do. And if 3% of people are on this stack, that means you're setting yourself ahead of the field by choosing this stack. So I think it makes a lot of sense. You've got to take some chances, and I don't think it's the safest play by any means. I wouldn't use, Cam Newton and Devin Funchess and Christian McCaffrey in cash games. There's no way I would do it. But in GPP, awesome stat, Christian.
Yeah, I agree. I forgot to mention McCaffrey. Actually, he's an excellent addition to that stack. It's kind of rare that you can stack a quarterback, some wide receivers, and then even throw in the running back in the same stack. But because of McCaffrey's role in the passing game, he's a great option there. He essentially acts like another wide receiver in that set. So, you could really go all out on the Panthers if you wanted to this week.
Christian, let's get one or two more GPP, maybe contrarian quarterbacks that we haven't talked about. A lot of people aren't going to talk about or even put in their lineups, but somebody who does have some upside. Do you see anyone on this slate like that?
I think Tyrod Taylor is a decent GPP dive. Again, I'm going to go back and say that I don't necessarily think it's worth diving really, really deep for a GPP quarterback here, but I think someone like Tyrod could be a good option at 5'9" on DraftKings. You could even, honestly, you could go and look at Josh McCown. He's a viable option against the Atlanta defense that's been struggling. A lot of his best weapons are guys like Matt Forte, who are pass-catching backs. Bilal Powell and Matt Forte combined for a lot of touches through the air. So McCown, I can't say it's like the smartest or even by far the safest play. It's not even close. But these are the kind of guys that if you're really trying to scrape the barrel, you could look at there.
Before we move on over to the running back position, let's take a step away and talk about Draft.com's awesome new contest that they built. So I think the actual reason that Tags is not here is because I beat him in Draft.com last week. So I knotted up the score. It's 2-2 on the season, and he just doesn't want to get beat again. So he's just not showing up for the podcast. I think that's what's going on. This week, we're actually doing something different, though. It's a bracket-style tournament called the Fantasy Pros Big Tournament. These contests run for several weeks. It's like, I think it's 5 straight weeks. And you have to beat 5 teams. If you beat the 5 teams, you advance the next week, and then you advance the next week. all the way to the final week, and $5,000 is the first prize, which is great because there's only 3,125 people competing. There's $26,000 up for grabs, and it's going to be a lot of fun. If you win the first week, you keep moving on, and it's going to be a blast. So like we've been doing, we just draft 5 players. You get a quarterback, 2 running backs, and either 2 wide receivers or tight ends. And the draft is starting now. This is going to move really fast. We've got 40 seconds until it starts. I have the first pick this time. So I got the Tagliere luck. I'm pretty excited about this. And I'm looking to see who I'm going to draft here. Le'Veon Bell is definitely the best running back of the week. Antonio Brown sitting there against Detroit, but I got to go Le'Veon Bell. If I don't, I'm just begging to lose. I want to advance here, and since we're not going up against 10 teams, I don't have to be as contrarian and go for like a big playmaker like Brandon Cooks. I can just go for the safest players, and if I have the best team, probably going to win. So Le'Veon Bell it is. We're starting here in 8 seconds, and it's going to get back around to me quick. So I'm building up my queue too. That way I'm not panicking when I'm on the clock for 30 seconds. It's going to be a lot of fun. So here we go. Le'Veon Bell is my pick, and I love the way that my draft started. So you guys can join the contest by going to draft.com/pros. And it's not the same way that you can enter the contest against Tags and I where you get a notification or whatever. Just go to draft.com/pros. It's going to be up on the top left. It has our logo and everything. You'll see the contest. It's called the Fantasy Pros Big Tournament, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Maybe I'll meet you in the second round after I win this one. Let's see where the draft is at now. Melvin Gordon went, AJ Green, Ezekiel Elliott. So a lot of guys that are pretty obvious. I'm really hoping that one of the 2 workhorses that I'm in love with this week, LaShawn McCoy or Mark Ingram, slips back to me. Oof, wow, Carson Wentz just went at the end of the first round. I really like that. And then took LaShawn McCoy. So that stinks. Maybe Mark Ingram will last. Let's see what happens here. All right, that went really quick. So Antonio Brown was taken, Travis Kelce right after him, and Kareem Hunt. So my guy is still there. Ooh, I don't know. Julio Jones is still there too. I don't know if I should take Mark Ingram and just have 2 workhorse running backs, or if I should take Julio Jones. It's just not enough running backs that I like. So I'm going Mark Ingram here, face Chicago, and I've got Le'Veon Bell, Mark Ingram. Oh man, this is funny. Okay, so because it's only 5 teams, I forgot I'm picking back-to-back. That means I get Julio Jones too. So Le'Veon Bell, Mark Ingram, Julio Jones, and I've got 2 more picks coming up. This is going to move really fast here. Mike Evans was just taken. So I'm building my queue here for the 4th and 5th round, and I know I'm going to get one of these top 5 quarterbacks. We've got Kirk Cousins against Dallas, Drew Brees against Chicago, Tom Brady against the Chargers. I don't love the matchup, but it's Tom Brady. And then Dak Prescott against Washington, who's always solid. So I like all 4 of those guys. I'd be happy with any of them. I don't especially like one more than the other. And then I need a wide receiver or tight end. So let's take a look at who they have there available. DeAndre Hopkins at Seattle. I don't especially love that. Michael Thomas has a really nice matchup. I know he hasn't been great lately. Keenan Allen is a nice, safe play. And I like my team enough that I think that's actually who I'd prefer at this point. Des Bryant gets Josh Norman, not especially interested. Amari Cooper, I love that matchup. He's probably who I'll end up getting unless Keenan Allen drops. So Alvin Kamara, Devonta Freeman, Zach Ertz all taken. We're into the 4th round now, and it's going to be my pick before I know it. Jordan Howard just went off the board, and Tom Brady, that's who I was leaning towards at quarterback. He went off the board. Joe Mixon, he could be a game changer here. Like, he could go for 30 points, or he could just completely sink the other guy's team. And then Michael Thomas, I was thinking about him at the last second instead of Keenan Allen. But Keenan Allen is still there, so I'm going to take him, pass on Amari Cooper, and watch Amari Cooper is probably going to go off and double whammy me with the bet I have with Tags. So Keenan Allen it is, and then I'm going to go with, let's see here. Who's the safest play? Dak Prescott against Washington, Kirk Cousins against Dallas. I'm going to go ahead and go with Dak Prescott. I just think he's on another level ahead of Kirk Cousins. The matchup isn't quite as good, but I trust Dak Prescott to get it done. So my final team here, Dak Prescott, Le'Veon Bell, Mark Ingram, Julio Jones, Keenan Allen. And as you've noticed, this team looks a lot better than most weeks when we do these contests because it's only 5 teams and you've got a 1 in 5 chance of advancing to the next round. It is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And the final picks in the draft are going to be, it looks like it's going really fast here, Kirk Cousins, Cam Newton, Rob Gronkowski, and the final pick should be coming in any second now. All right, and the projections are out, and I am favored to beat Tag's team by 81 points. I'm actually projected to finish first, which I'm not very surprised by, not because I had the best draft, but because I had the first pick, and that really helps getting Le'Veon Bell, and then you get the 4th and 5th picks on the swing around before everyone else closes off. So I like my team a lot. I'll let y'all know on Twitter how I did. Maybe I'll see you in the second round. Remember, that's draft.com/pros. That's PROS. And when you go there, look for this big tournament. It has our big logo on it. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'll see you in the second round. All right, let's move on over to running back, and we'll talk cash games really quick. For me, it's simple. Like right now, the way the season's going, there's like 5 bell cow running backs, and you know exactly what you're going to get every single week, like 25 plus touches. And for $9,000, I can pay $9,000 for 25 plus touches. So I'm spending up at running back this week. There's not really a super safe play. Like you can say Joe Mixon, he's in a great matchup. He's a great running back. I really think that he is. He's super cheap. But he made that comment, and Marvin Lewis might just give him 5 carries. I mean, he got 7 carries last week, even though he was dominating, and it was a great matchup. So we don't know what's going to happen with Joe Mixon. I think he's a great GPP play, and he's probably going to be really highly owned, maybe even in cash games, but I'm not playing him. So for me, I'm spending up on Le'Veon Bell. I'll pay for him every single week at this point, and LaShawn McCoy against Oakland. Oh, by the way, Pittsburgh is playing Sunday night, so they're not going to be on the DraftKings slate, but for FanDuel, I'm all over Le'Veon Bell in cash games.
Yeah, I love those guys. It's definitely the kind of week to spend up for running back. You can see a lot of other options where you can, we've already given a couple really prime examples of quarterbacks and stacks that you can use that are pretty cheap, which allows you to pay up for those guys, and it's totally worth it. You're totally right. If you can get a guy who's going to give you 25 touches, it's really hard to beat that value, even when their price is much, much higher than even any of the quarterbacks on the slate.
Yeah, both of them should be in good game scripts as well. They're both expected to win. They're both going up against defenses who are worse against the run than they are against the pass. And so I think it makes a lot of sense for both these guys. Who's your top running back of the week for cash games?
I really like Mark Ingram, actually. He's one of my favorite options. I haven't been as hard on the Mark Ingram train as I feel like I should have in the past couple of weeks. And I've kind of regretted it, but I now the situation is pretty dire. You can't really overlook him here. He's getting a ton of looks in the shadow zone, a lot of touches overall, and now Tuitt's out. So the matchup itself in Chicago is phenomenal for him. So with a Chicago defense that is kind of like low key been okay against the pass. I like the matchup a lot.
I think they've been okay against the run as well, but I mean, Mark Ingram at this price, man, he's got 30 touches in week 6, 26 in week 7. Ever since AP's gone, like it is full steam ahead on Mark Ingram, and his price hasn't really rise that much. So I think this is a great place. Again, New Orleans is favored by 10 over Chicago. I actually think I'm taking the Bears there. I think they're going to keep it closer than that, but the Saints should be up about a touchdown, maybe 2 the whole game. That means a lot of carries for Mark Ingram again. So I love the call. He's super safe.
Exactly. Yeah. Favorable game script. Yeah. There's a lot of things to love about Mark Ingram this week.
Now, what about like Jordan Howard or maybe a Melvin Gordon at New England? I don't like Melvin Gordon because of the game script, but he's getting a ton of work even in the passing game when they're behind. So he's kind of game script proof at this point.
I agree. I mean, Gordon has such an incredibly high usage rate. He is one of those dominant bell cow backs, and then he gets a lot of looks in the passing game. So he is the kind of player that you can't really make an argument for necessarily fading him in a given week, because he could go for 30 in any situation really, because of how versatile he is. Technically you figure the game script might not match up exactly, but at the same time, sometimes when those teams get into situations, they go to their most talented players, and it would be hard to argue that Gordon's not one of their most talented players. So, is
there anyone else in this mid-range that you're considering for cash games, or do you move on down to the cheaper players for cash games?
Moving on to the cheaper players, honestly, like we were talking about, it's a week to pay up for running back. I think you could make the case for someone like McCaffrey. We talked about how he's a better play for GPPs, and I do believe that.
Full PPR DraftKings, McCaffrey's on my radar. FanDuel, I'm probably not using because we've seen him throw up a bunch of stinkers.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't make any sense on FanDuel, but when you get those PPR points for those receptions, it definitely it's an opportunity there. I would say, if you need to go down, if you're not paying for those top running backs, it's because you're going and really saving salary with guys like Joe Mixon or even a Wendell Smallwood or
Deion Lewis on DraftKings going up against the Chargers. I mean, Deion Lewis is getting all the goal line work right now. The Chargers are one of the worst in the league against the run, and Deion Lewis is getting more and more snaps, more and more touches every single week. So on DraftKings, I like him quite a bit. He's probably going to get you 4-6 receptions.
Yeah, I think I like Lewis a lot. I mean, it's always up and down with the Patriots backfield, but he's been he hasn't screwed up yet, which is usually what
Yeah.
happens. Like that's usually the point where Belichick says, "Okay, next man up." But so he hasn't actually botched anything too badly. So yeah, he should be good for quite a while, or at least until he does. For sure.
Plus
So,
the game
I
script
like
there,
Willis.
New England's favored by 8.5 points, so he should get more carries. I think he'll get the most carries he has all season so far. My other guy, the only other guy I'll consider on FanDuel for cash is Amir Abdullah against Pittsburgh. I can't believe how cheap he is. In Pittsburgh, he's not available. Okay, Amir Abdullah is not available on DraftKings. But with Pittsburgh, I mean, they're not getting beat in the air. They're going to have to run the ball. And Abdullah's getting a lot of work as it is. He's coming off the bye. I just think this situation sets up really well for him. And I know he hasn't broken the big run yet, but like McCaffrey, he's the type of guy who can. So I think he's got a floor and he's got upside. And that's what I like in my cash game play. So if I wasn't spending up, Amir Abdullah is actually my third favorite player on FanDuel for cash games.
Yeah, I like Abdullah too. I think he's a great floor player. I mean, he is a good number one back. I think he's flown under the radar quite a bit. Like, even if just the price is indicative of that on FanDuel, he's definitely, he's not insanely reliant on passing targets. So he's great on FanDuel. I think he's a really, really good option at his price point.
So let's move on over and talk about GPP for running backs. And there are two guys who just catch my eye immediately. I'm curious who yours are first, though.
So one of my, I think the Oakland situation is worth a look for GPPs.
Yeah, good call.
In that running back core. So you're looking at the combination of Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington. So again, last week they basically split evenly, so it's one of those situations where it's hard to say. Neither of them are safe enough for cash, but if you wanted to take a dip, if you want to take a risk with one of them for GPPs, I mean, I guess you could play both if you really wanted to go out on a limb, but it's more likely that you would just play one. And I think you could look at Jalen Richard as a guy who has really big play upside, and he's really involved in the passing game, even more so than Washington. So he's the kind of guy that makes a great sub 5K, running back.
Yeah, you mentioned Wendell Smallwood as well against the 49ers. The 49ers, if you don't know, give up by far the most points to pass-catching running backs of any team in the NFL. And Wendell Smallwood is really the only guy who receives out of the backfield there. He's getting healthier and healthier, more and more snaps. He has big upside this week, and he's cheap. But the two guys that stand out for me, Bilal Powell for the Jets against the Falcons. In his last 6 games started, he's gone well over 100 yards 5 out of 6 times. I know that, he hasn't had a great season, but he hasn't really been given an opportunity. I think he gets an increased opportunity now that he, flashed against the Jaguars. He's healthy. He goes against the Falcons. He catches passes. He gets big plays all the time. Bilal Powell is by far my favorite GPP play of the week. And then Tevin Coleman against the Jets. We've just seen it happen too many times where he goes off, and the Jets aren't especially good against the run either. So I could see Coleman sneaking into the end zone twice, breaking off a big run, getting 120 plus yards. And it's just what he does. It happens once or twice a season. And I think it works out well this week for him.
Yeah, I think that Coleman's always that guy he seems to always be in the position where he could get 2 touchdowns any given week, just because of the way that they split with Freeman and stuff like that. And then you go back to those Jets running backs, and you look at Bilal Powell, and you look at a matchup against the Falcons, who held that crown for worst against pass catching backs for a long time. And so, like I said before, I like Smallwood for that same reason. My only concern with Powell is that, well, it's not necessarily my only concern, but the biggest concern there is that Matt Forte has been catching a lot of passes too. So the matchup is certainly there, and the situation's there. And I think I'm the biggest believer in Bilal Powell. I think he's a really, really talented player, and they have absolutely screwed him by not giving him the touches he deserves. But it's hard to say what they're going to do with Forte healthy in the mix right now. So. But yes, he's the kind of guy that's a perfect GPP play, along with someone like Smallwood for the same reasons.
I like Tariq Cohen against the Saints as well. Cohen's kind of been forgotten. He didn't get any carries last week, but he's got the big play upside. I mean, we've seen him do it a couple times already this season. And then here's the thing, a lot of times you'll look at these winning lineups and you'll see a player where it just made no sense to play. Like it's against a good defense. He hasn't been playing well lately. He's kind of been forgotten. And I think that guy right now might be Carlos Hyde. Like, Philadelphia has a great run defense, but Carlos Hyde is getting a ton of work. He hasn't been very good lately, but he could sneak into the end zone 2, maybe 3 times. If he gets in the end zone 3 times with even 60 yards, he's the top running back of the week. And I'm not saying it's likely, but I'm saying it is possible with Carlos Hyde, and he's going to be less than 1% owned. So he's a player I like. Christian, let's move on over to wide receiver now. All right, so at wide receiver, I mean, we've got a couple guys here. Antonio Brown's not available on DraftKings. He is in play for FanDuel, and he's just been getting so much work that I think you've got to consider him, even with Darius Slay on the other side. But then Julio Jones and AJ Green, both in killer matchups. Do you like both these guys this week?
For sure. I think I love AJ Green. Like I said, he's part of my favorite cash game stack. Yeah. So every reason to love him this week, especially in the matchup. He draws a really good individual matchup as well. So everything to love about AJ Green. He absolutely dominates bad cornerbacks, excuse me. So he's the kind of guy you can just lock and load and feel pretty safe about it every week. Julio is maybe not the guy that I'm looking at, not necessarily for any particular reason, other than that I think he's just less safe than AJ Green. And so unless for some reason you're trying to finagle Matt Ryan into your lineups, if you're looking like a GPP thing, Julio's not my favorite cash game play, but a perfectly fine matchup, and just as we saw last week, he can get the volume when they need it for sure.
I'm looking at the other guys in the top tier here. Des Bryant against Josh Norman, Mike Evans against Carolina and James Bradbury, DeAndre Hopkins against Seattle, and probably going to see a lot of Richard Sherman. I'm not really excited about those 3. So the other guy's Brandon Cooks. He's not a cash game play. He's a boomer bust guy. Keenan Allen, he gets so many targets. It's a high over-under in this game. New England, as I mentioned, with Phillip Rivers, it gives up a ton of passing points. So Keenan Allen is my favorite guy. I actually like him more than AJ Green this week.
Yeah, I love Keenan Allen this week. He's in a great spot, especially if this is the kind of spot where you would look for cash games and think, okay, well, what quarterback am I playing? Can I stack them? So obviously, if you're going to go with Phillip Rivers, you want Keenan Allen. Yeah. And if you're going to go with Dalton, you want AJ Green. So that can help you drive your lineup construction more than other factors even sometimes. And I agree with you with these other, maybe the guys in that top tier, I'm not super excited about. I think Michael Thomas is in an okay spot, but I think there's a couple guys like in that Keenan Allen, Doug Baldwin range that I'm really, really high on. Even then, you dip down into Kelvin Benjamin area, even Pierre Garçon. Yeah,
Garçon with all those receptions, man, against Philly. Yeah, San Francisco's going to throw the ball a ton.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you got to... San Fran has to at some point look to their Pierre Garçons and their Carlos Hydes. So those are the kind of guys, they're going to get a lot of volume. Pierre Garçon is obviously in a distinctly better matchup than Carlos Hyde in that scenario, but I think he's a really, really good option. I think the great thing about wide receiver this week is you can really there's good cash game plays all the way down.
Every single price point. Yeah, you're exactly right. You mentioned Michael Thomas. I'm going to go back to him really quick. I wouldn't typically consider him for cash games based on what he's been doing so far, but his price has been depressed so much that I like Michael Thomas quite a bit. He's probably like 4th or 5th out of my favorite wide receivers for this week, but just below him, Amari Cooper. Tags and I talked about it earlier in the week that Michael Crabtree is going to be the one going up against Tre'Davious White, and Amari Cooper has a killer matchup. He had 19 targets last week, and I know he hasn't been great until last week, but he was in crazy difficult matchups all season until last week. So Amari Cooper, tons of upside, and I like his floor too.
Yeah, I agree. I think with regards to Michael Thomas, he's in a great matchup with Prince Amukamara. So that's really what's to love about Michael Thomas, despite the fact that he's been a little bit of a lame duck in some regards. And then I think Amari Cooper, I don't know, maybe you just have some bigger stones than I do with Amari Cooper. I think I'm a little hesitant. As of yet, I think he's definitely viable in GPPs, and I get your argument for why you could play him in cash. I don't think I will personally be doing it, but just because I think that I like a couple of their options.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I might come off of Amari Cooper because you're right. It is just a little bit wild, but I see those 19 targets and I'm drooling at $7,200.
Exactly. I mean, he's and yeah. Once they bring his price point back up, I believe. I mean, Amari Cooper, excuse me, is one of the most athletic players, but yet somehow he lacks some like fundamental football talents. And so I think he's a great player, obviously, and he can go for those 19 target games when he just totally exploits a matchup. But I just, in the same way that I am somewhat hesitant of changes in coaching staffs, I think I'm also a little hesitant to jump on the bandwagon of huge volume changes in any given matchup week to week. So for cash games. So that's the kind of situation where I don't feel good about playing Amari Cooper in cash, but he's not a bad play.
Now, Christian, you mentioned value all the way down. I'm assuming you're talking about Josh Doxson, who, like I said, he's going to be in every single one of my lineups. Are there any other guys in this price point that you really like?
The thing is that I don't. There wasn't really anyone on my radar because you don't need to play anyone else down there.
Yeah,
like Doxson's such a lock that I didn't ever even really consider. Like, I don't know. Maybe
I guess if you're playing
Benjamin
AJ Green,
option,
Le'Veon Bell, LaShawn McCoy, and you're spending up at quarterback, like that's the only reason you would need to get Doxson and someone else. But yeah, for me, it's just I need one cheap guy, and it's definitely Doxson.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think you'd necessarily, I mean, depending on how Goodwin and his injuries shake out, if he actually practices maybe tomorrow or anything like that, he would be a decent option down there in that price point. But yeah, there's no one even really close to as good of a matchup as Doxson in that price point. So I think you can look elsewhere in the salaries.
Now, before we go GPP, I forgot to mention Alshon Jeffrey. We talked about Carson Wentz going up against the 49ers, and Alshon has had the most difficult schedule of any wide receiver in the league so far, and he's actually done quite well. He's getting a ton of targets, and I think he's going to get himself another 10 plus this week. So I really like his chances to get his hands on a bunch of receptions, get in the end zone. Alshon's a good play, man, and he's still cheap.
I agree. I mean, I think that the matchups for those Eagles wide receivers are great across the board. I like Aguilar's matchup better. Quan Williams has just been a cancer in the slot.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, I mean, Jeffrey's a great player and he's involved in the offense, but maybe not in traditional fantasy ways all the time. They use him to blow up the defense, and like you said, that might be because of the matchups that he's been in, but he's someone that I would definitely like play in a stack with Carson Wentz and stuff like that.
Okay.
I think in a straight up choice for one of those Philly wide receivers, I might go with Aguilar. So that's the kind of situation where I would probably stick with Aguilar, who I actually think is a little bit safer. But this is the exact opportunity for a guy like Alshon Jeffrey to break out for sure.
I think it goes without saying, Christian, that every single week for GPP, every single time Brady receiver is on the radar because, 1 week it's Chris Hogan, the next week it's Brandon Cooks, the next week it's Danny Amendola, where one of them goes big. So I always like to get one of those guys in most of my lineups. Who else is on your GPP radar for wide receiver?
Like I said, I liked to the same vein of that. I think that something it kind of applies in the same way to the Carolina. Just the way I talked about Benjamin and Funchess and those guys.
Yeah.
So those are all on my radar for GPPs. I think Chris Hogan is definitely on my radar every single week. He seems like just a solid, huge upside player every week.
Yeah, I like Deshaun Jackson against Carolina as well. I mean, Carolina has a good pass defense, but Deshaun Jackson has big playability against anybody. And then Tyrell Williams against the Patriots. I mean, we already talked about how the Chargers are going to throw a ton. Williams, we've seen him go for really big plays. He's a nice cheap play, so I like him against the Patriots in GPP as well. Now at tight end, I wish so bad Kyle Rudolph was on the slate because going up against Cleveland at his price, I think he's going to have a huge game. But he's not. So I'm moving down. I'm looking at Hunter Henry and Jason Witten. I can't really make up my mind between the two for cash games. Just kind of depends on how much money I have left. But I like them both a ton. Not really considering anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I love those two guys. I agree. Rudolph would be an excellent position. I think tight end's kind of a weird spot this week where there's a ton of guys that you could conceivably play in, like just kind of plug in last almost, based on how much salary you have left.
Yeah.
It's not a week to necessarily go nuts building around a tight end, but I think you can still get guys in great spots like Hunter Henry, like Jason Witten without doing that. So, Hunter Henry is you can't overlook him with the way that the Patriots have been defending tight ends, especially around the end zone. So he's a great option there, especially considering how much the end zone usage he gets just on the Chargers in general. He's a fantastic option. Jason Witten is still cranking out big numbers despite the fact that it is now October and no longer September.
Yeah.
Mr. September is still continuing to produce even
Washington
at his old age.
is horrible against tight ends too.
Absolutely terrible. I think that they didn't look like they were gonna be bad against the tight ends, just given their linebacker strengths coming into the season, and they've just proved me very, very wrong every single week. So at this point, I'm all in targeting those tight ends against Washington. I think Witten's in a great spot, especially given the fact that some of the other Dallas passing options aren't in quite as good of spots, like you said, with Des Bryant being covered by Josh Norman and stuff like that. So Witten's a fantastic option for not that much.
What do you think about Zach Ertz against San Francisco? I know San Francisco's actually been pretty good against tight ends, but Zach Ertz has been so consistent, man.
Zach Ertz is the kind of player that you can't ever really justify fading.
Yeah.
He's just a complete beast, and his rapport with Carson Wentz is undeniable. I was reading a report of Doug Peterson talking about how Zach Ertz and Wentz walk around the facility together. They're always talking. They're always they're joined at the hip, basically. And that's the kind of, obviously that's a dumb narrative, but, that plays out on the field too. I mean, he absolutely is one of Carson's favorite targets, and not even just in check down panic mode either. He'll shoot him down the field. Just last week he hit Ertz a couple times down the sideline. So he's not afraid to involve him in those big plays. Zach Ertz is one of the most versatile tight ends any given week. And if you ever have the salary to afford him, you should never feel bad about playing him.
For GPP, tight end is such a crapshoot. There's always one random guy, whether it's OJ Howard last week who goes for 2 touchdowns, or George Kittle, or we mentioned the guy for the Bengals. I'm forgetting his name because he just really Tyler Kroft. He really doesn't matter that much. Someone does it every week.
No, he doesn't.
You can make a case for anybody. Usually I like to change who I'm playing in cash games in GPP because the cash game guys are going to be more highly owned, but I like Hunter Henry again in GPP. My favorite GPP play, however, is Austin Hooper. Everyone's going to be fading him because of the recency bias, but Austin Hooper has big playability. He's got big target ability. It's a good matchup against the Jets. He's super cheap. Everything's in his favor. I like him.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're on the same page here. He was going to be the one. I honestly didn't think you were going to say him. I thought I was safe. I was going to come out here and be like, Austin Hooper's the play this week. But apparently the cat's out of the bag on that one. So I like him as one of those crazy, weird tight end GPP plays. I actually do like Nico Leary as one of those, another, could win Mr. Irrelevant. But
you have to. He might get 10 receptions. The Bills have nobody.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's another bottom of the barrel guy. Dixon, like I talked about earlier. There's a lot of guys that Tyler Kroft. These are all guys. Even someone like Cody Fleener. You could plug these guys and just get real lucky, or you could get 2 catches out of them. You never really know. Or those 2 catches could be for touchdowns. Sometimes that happens with tight ends a lot. Yeah. It's always a crapshoot if you're trying to go for a GBP tight end. That's the kind of scenario where you might not want to go all in on one of those random guys.
Yeah.
But those are the guys I like too.
Okay, let's close out by talking about some defenses. And I'm telling you what, this is the worst defensive slate I have ever seen. There's not a single matchup that screams this is easy, let's do it, because you've got Minnesota at Cleveland playing in the Sunday morning game. There's really nobody that I can trust for cash games. I'm playing Pittsburgh at Detroit, but you can't do that on DraftKings either, so I don't feel especially good about it.
Yep, I mean, I took one look at this slate and said, geez, I wish Minnesota defense was on here because I would play them in a heartbeat.
They'd be 80% owned, right?
Yeah, for sure. And rightfully so. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you could play them in GPPs and not even feel bad about the ownership there. Because that would just be insane. But otherwise, if you're looking for a cash defense, I think the Eagles are solid there. I mean, we talked about how Garcon's in a good spot, but that's contingent on him being able to get the ball thrown to him. So, while I do think it'll happen, it's the kind of thing that it wouldn't really break your back if as far as your defense, if Garcon did do well. And the great thing about the Eagles defense, regardless of, even like when they were in like a, projected shootout last Monday, they're still a decently good pick just because they can force so many turnovers.
So many sacks too. They've got 4+ sacks in 3 games, multiple sacks in 6 out of 7.
Exactly. I actually did not mean just turnovers. I meant like they can get those solid fantasy points that are not related to the score of the other team. So those very, very set in stone sacks, turnovers, stuff like that. So that kind of upside is always there for the Eagles. I mean, they just dominate the line of scrimmage, and they're extremely deep there too. So if you're looking to not stress over defense, I would just play the Eagles. They're going to run you a little bit more expensive than the other defenses, obviously, but that's the one defense that you could really feel safe about getting some fantasy points out of.
You talked me into it, man. That looks good. I was thinking like, I'll just play the Jaguars on the bye. I don't care. They're so good. Like there's nobody else. But the Eagles against San Francisco, that makes sense. Now let's get out of here with one GPP play, maybe one under the radar that you like at defense special teams.
I think one defense that I really like down kind of, honestly, if you're looking for a really gutsy GPP defense play, it might be the Patriots for me.
That's what I was going to say, man. You took my play.
We just go back and forth taking each other's plays. I don't know what this is.
I think that's good news, man.
I think it is too. I'm feeling better about this week already. But yeah, the Patriots, because the Chargers are pretty turnover prone. Phillip Rivers can have a good day and still chuck 3 balls to the other team. I mean, I don't really know how that happens, but it does, and it's kind of been a pretty consistent trend over the past few years. So, and like I said before, it's entirely possible that an organization like the Patriots just got their stuff together on defense.
Like, they always start slow, and then they turn it around, and they win like 9 of their last 10 games. And, you can see the Patriots getting up 3 touchdowns, Phillip Rivers throwing 50 passes, and 5 of them are picked, like when the Steelers got behind the Jaguars. And Big Ben, who's a good quarterback, probably about the same level as Phillip Rivers, just was turnover prone because they're sitting in nickel and dime packages just waiting for him to throw a bad pass.
Exactly. I mean, it's the kind of thing where the Patriots weren't projected to be a bad defense at all because they have a lot of talent. So there was something wonky about what they were running in the backfield, and something wasn't working, and something wasn't working for a lot of weeks in a row. But that could have changed. I mean, we have seen it changed 1 week against a good team. So a good team that's underperforming, to be fair, but against a good team nonetheless. So, if you wanted to really go out on a limb and pick a defense that could potentially be a really good play, it might be the Patriots, who could accrue a lot of those turnovers and actually just be a solid defense overall.
Yeah. All right, Christian. Well, that's all for today's show. Really appreciate you coming on, man. It was fun to do it with you. I wish Tags could have been here, but this was good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate having me on here. It's always a pleasure.
It's our pleasure. Take care. And for those of you listening at home, we've got 3 more episodes coming up next week, so make sure to tune in for those. Waiver Wire, Start Sit, and then our DFS show next week. Remember, subscribe and review us on iTunes, and then send us a screenshot at contest@fantasypros.com if you want a shot at that $100 fathead.com gift card. Thanks again to the sponsor of today's show, draft.com. I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.